Recording in
Welcome,
progress.
my name is Brendan Owens and I'm currently the Open Science Coordinator for Science Gallery Dublin and an Astronomer Emeritus for the Royal Observatory Greenwich. In this presentation, I'd like to talk to you about collaborations and collisions in science and art. I'll start with a brief reflection on my personal journey, follow that with some observations about astronomy communication, before moving on to share some best practices when it comes to science and art collaborations. Finally, I'll wrap up with some inspirational science and art pieces and some final thoughts. So to kick off this short talk, I'd like to give you some impression of where I'm coming from to set the scene. My trajectory took me from an undergraduate degree at Dublin City University, with time spent over the summers at Armagh Observatory in Northern Ireland, where I first really caught the bug for astronomy communication. Towards the end of the degree, I wanted to expand my knowledge of communicating science. So an MSc in Science Communication was my next step. Over the next decade, I worked at the Royal Observatory Greenwich, developing and delivering programs for schools and the public, including exhibition curation, community events, and media interviews and more. Finally, today, I work at Science Gallery in Trinity College Dublin. Previously, I'd collaborated with artists on events in the observatory, but now I work in a truly transdisciplinary team of artists, science communicators, and education specialists, and have further expanded my understanding of science and art with and for society. So, between 2010 and 2020, I came to understand the scale and scope of audience interests, particularly considering I spent a lot of my time in a planetarium answering countless questions. Now, this isn't a definitive list, but interest from young and old often included alien life, black holes, star signs, supermoons, and the questions, aren't lots of the stars we see dead already? What's inside a black hole? And when's the sun going to explode and destroy us all? The point being that audience interests span a huge variety of topics in astronomy. Topics that touch on superstition, science fiction, philosophy, history, and more. No matter your audience, they bring a multifaceted perspective of the universe from their lived experiences, and they'll also have some preconceived ideas about astronomers. Whether it's the media, movies, science centres, cartoons, books, or historic accounts, there are some hard-to-shake stereotypes about astronomers. It's often thought we know everything there is to know about telescopes and use them regularly, that we can point out anything in the night sky at a moment's notice, that no matter the specialism, astronomers must be familiar with any new space news, that astronomers must be super smart people, that they're usually men and older men at that, and something we get a lot from younger audiences asking if we've been to space or the moon. To contrast perceptions with reality, I put here two images from two different situations in my life. The first up top, when I was photographed for a newspaper after successfully installing a modern telescope at the Royal Observatory, one that we purposely set as an astrographic set of instruments. And yet I was asked to be next to it, look through it, play with it. And the lower image is solar physics research during my undergraduate degree. You may have guessed that this was data from telescopes I'll never get anywhere near, JAXA's Hinode Solar Observatory and NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, hundreds to tens of thousands of kilometers away in space. All this is to say that how the rest of the world views astronomers or science can be a far cry from the truth, as this XKCD comic strip excellently describes. So, before we look at collaborating with artists, here are some broad pointers that some may find old news and others may find helpful, especially if it's your first time putting together talks or events for those other than your peers. So the first 4 points deal with presentation content generally. It can be tempting to try to get your audience right into the heart of a specialism, but normally a short engagement will mean you won't be able to jump deep into your research topic with a narrow focus. It can also be good to work out what your main hook is, even if it's only a gateway to your specific topic. For instance, you're specifically interested in nanoflares in the sun's corona, but your hook is explosions on the sun or seeing the invisible sun. Bear in mind that a lay audience will typically not be taking any notes, and you can only expect room for a few or maybe even just one main takeaway. For example, the sun's atmosphere is hotter than its surface. While you may have avoided getting lost in niche research talking points, decided a hook, and agreed your main takeaways, all this would not be effective if there isn't scene setting that introduces complex concepts in an open and inviting way. Perhaps you draw on common experiences, a bit of storytelling, or a participative activity. The other 4 pointers really try to hammer home this point. You are not your audience. Depending on your target audience, you'll have to assume little to no knowledge of your field, and maybe even an aversion to science if you're trying to reach a hard-to-reach group. No matter the case, answering questions can be daunting when a lot is expected from a public-facing astronomer. The short, vulnerable phrase, "I don't know," is very powerful and important. It reveals some truths that help break down stereotypes and can empower someone to investigate for themselves. It can be added to by trying to give a piece of interesting information that is related, but doesn't necessarily answer the question. However, with great power comes great responsibility. We can't keep ignoring someone's questions to get to an area we know lots about, so use this wisely. Finally, many people will not be comfortable saying if they didn't catch something or they weren't satisfied with an answer. Try to gather some critical friends, and if open evaluation is an option, offer it. It can be crushing to hear something negative about our communication, but if it's constructive and we can learn from it, it's worth hearing. So, when it comes to collaborations with artists, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on these 2 realms of science and art and what they have in common. And when I speak of artists, that is incredibly broad. I've worked with visual artists, comedians, writers, sculptors, actors, poets, and photographers. When it comes down to it, science and art, broadly speaking, share many similarities, some shared values, and most importantly, some common processes. Creative problem solving, iterative experiments, discussion, debate, they all have a place in science and art. Now, the terminology, culture, and practices may differ, but there's no escaping these shared values. This unity is well worth remembering when starting a collaboration between scientists and artists. So next up, I have some tips for your collaborative projects. Now, this is by no means a definitive list of recommendations for collaborations between scientists and artists, but they're all important notes to take on board. Firstly, take time to get to know each other. This may seem obvious, but if you don't take the time to get to know each other, you could find that every following step is harder. Any initial conversation can drive mutual enthusiasm and puts everyone at ease to explain where they're coming from. Secondly, be curious and be flexible. This is a state of being more than anything else. There could be nothing worse than going in with a fixed sense of what the collaboration is going to be or should be. Remain curious and be appropriately flexible. Next, respecting creative practices is a careful reminder that just as there are stereotypes of astronomers, there are stereotypes of artists. A lot of what they say and how they approach a topic may be quite different from what you're used to or have a bias towards. The next point is clear. It's very important to establish hopes and expectations for the collaboration early on. This can be about your expected role in the artist's eye, for example, an expert consultant, a subject, or co-producer. 5. Inspire, but don't dominate. Now, this is one I've been guilty of in the past, where my inspirational chats with potential collaborators have meant I effectively steamroll the conversation and leave little room for them to express themselves. Clarify the hook and the takeaway. These may not be totally clear immediately, but calling back to my general presentation tips earlier, be sure to have these pinned to a wall for the rest of the journey. Clarify duration. This may have been carried out as part of expectations, but it's essential to clarify this early to avoid disappointment for anyone involved if the commitment is misunderstood. This next one may appear illogical or even scary, but the nature of the collaboration, especially if it's iterative, will most likely have an unknowable final outcome. This goes for projects of many varieties and subjects, but it can be particularly nebulous for a creative piece. Point 9 counteracts this. Make sure you have knowable concrete outputs. For example, you may simply know you want to have a launch night for a visual piece in a particular space in a particular month of the year. And point 10, one shot or more. Ask yourself as you progress if this is a one-shot collaboration or if you're intending a recurring or growing collaboration. If it's the latter, you may want to consider opportunities to iterate or expand work over multiple projects, and it may involve new fundraising and more. Finally, in the beginning, middle, and end, reflect on the question, who is this for? Know your audience and plan for them. Make sure not to get trapped in a small collaboration echo chamber. Checking in with this question regularly will ensure that the collaboration is rich for the intended audience. So, we love a good acronym in astronomy, but here's one from a management perspective that can prove useful in successfully managing a collaboration. You may want to consider a table that includes rows of tasks listed chronologically and columns for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. For each task, you should identify the person who will carry out the work, the people responsible, an individual who signs the work off, someone who is accountable, those who are consulted with in a dialogue, and those who need to be updated in one-way communication to be aware of progress. So in other words, those that have to be informed. You could use a short list with this framework and grow it over time as the collaboration progresses. Though a framework such as RACI can help, it's not the total package. I don't expect I could cover every eventuality you will encounter here, but I have some pitfalls to avoid. Firstly, be sure to manage expectations. This can be in terms of commitment, expected promotion of the final piece, availability of either party, and a whole host of other reasons. By keeping communication regular and transparent, then expectations can be appropriately managed. Also, on either end of collaboration, delays are always a risk. Some forward planning that includes a level of risk analysis and fallback plans to achieve agreed outputs are good safety measures. An important point to address early on will be the legal ownership of the piece. Make sure to have agreed in writing who holds the rights to the piece. On a related note, be mindful of the artist's vision. It's important to respect this, considering it can extend to mounting, lighting, number of appearances, duration of showing, specific location, time of day, and much more depending on the piece or pieces. While compromises may be possible, making adjustments without consultation can be damaging to the relationship or worse. Now, to counteract this serious note, my last point is not a pitfall as much as it is a reminder. Be playful. This is a chance for you and your collaborators to get out of your comfort zone, be involved in something new and innovative, and the more open to play we are, the easier it is to break down boundaries and explore new territory. Now, as we come near the end of my presentation, I'd like to provide some visual food for thought. Here are two of my favourite examples of evocative science and art pieces in previous Science Gallery exhibitions: Infectious in 2009 and Intimacy in 2018. One shows agar dishes, one of which I kissed, like the other visitors, and the results are grown over 48 hours, and students were on hand to explain what was in my mouth. I'd never had a participative experience like it. And the second piece, Machine to Be Another, on the right, and now I didn't experience this personally, but the tales I've heard give an idea of the physical empathy at play. Cameras mounted on the front of the VR headsets showed participants a view of themselves, and that effectively enabled a body swap experience. And mirroring exercises such as the one seen here enhanced the effect. Now, I didn't necessarily come away with a particular scientific explanation or concept understanding, but I found a connection to the pieces and subject matter that sticks in my mind to this day. Over these next two slides, I present the works of artists Ione Parkin and Gillian McFarland as part of their collaboration with astronomers called Creativity and Curiosity. Images of these tactile works of paper, metal and glass were displayed on the 360-degree dome of the Peter Harrison Planetarium in Greenwich. And I wanted to pull out a specific quote from their collection catalogue that exemplifies the way in which these collaborations are often not about a direct explanation of a concept and is somewhat removed from the scientific research, but embodies shared practices. The quote begins, "The artists are expressing a lateral, not literal response to the scientific research, a physical, tactile experience rather than an explanation. Parallels of process have emerged between the artists and the scientists. An excitement about uncertainty, ambiguity, and anomaly. A desire not just to observe, but to look beyond." While the intention was not to find a creative way to communicate the science, the tactile nature of the art can offer an entry point to the subject matter, generates conversations, and elicits a response. For me, here, I could be looking at the moons Io and Enceladus. And so the final outcome can work on various levels once observed and interpreted by an audience. And I wanted to end with two pieces from the previous exhibition we had inside Science Gallery Dublin called Invisible. The abstract kinetic sculpture on the left, Dark Distortions, mimics the motions of galaxies, and the lenses bend the light rays associating the piece with dark matter. It shows how by simply looking carefully, we can discover things beyond our imagination. And this was a collaboration of the artist with scientists involved in ESA's Euclid mission due to launch next year. And the piece on the right invites you to physically tune into dark matter. As you walk through the structure, you hear different frequencies and interference patterns as the speakers translate current dark matter simulations into sound patterns. The artist collaborated with researchers and an audio engineer to create this sound installation based on scientific simulations of dark matter speed and density. And so, some final thoughts from me worth considering. A collaboration between scientists and artists does not always need to result in a polished final outcome, if the situation allows for that. You could be prototyping together. It could be a pilot program, a taster, or a tester. Personally, I would say that it's easy to get wrapped up in the enthusiasm and optimism that go hand in hand with a collaboration like this. But don't sacrifice transparency to keep a relationship sweet. If there's an issue or misunderstanding on the journey, express it and resolve it sooner rather than later. As the quote from Vera Rubin says, "Science progresses best when observations force us to alter our preconceptions." The collaborations you embark in will hopefully result in a new perspective on your science, the art, and people's interactions with the two. Be open to that. Don't forget to enjoy the collaboration. Be sure to look up from the process and the deadlines to enjoy the experience. And something I need to remind myself of regularly is to share. Broadcast the experience, the outcomes, your thoughts. It could be a joint Instagram video, a series of tweets, a blog, working with the comms team on a press release. When you pull off great success, celebrate it and share it. You might very well inspire others. Thank you very much.